It's late evening, of course, and we are in the middle between for you, between drinks and after parties and everything. But we fully understand that and are happy that you are here, and we hope that some people will join us. Yes, they are coming. Please come in. And we'll try to make our discussion really a discussion also between the participants in the panel. And if you have any questions, then please be prepared to ask us. But why are we here? We are here to discuss on the topic, effective global asset recovery. Can Ukraine's case be a success story? I don't have an answer. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't almost understand at all the topic. So let's try to figure out where is the answer and what actually are the next very specific and practical steps everyone from us here in the panel will do when we'll go home. That's at least the idea of this discussion. Let me introduce participants and myself as well. I am representing Transparency International Latvian chapter. My name is Ines Tauriņa, Executive Director of organization. And I will try to give you a little bit of energy to really discuss in this topic. So, who are participating? Actually, Transparency International Ukraine, our colleagues in Ukraine initiated the topic, and Katerina Rozenko is representing the TA Ukraine, Deputy Executive Director for Legal Affairs. Welcome, Katerina. Then we have Jonathan Spicer, Basel Institute on Governance, Senior Asset Recovery Specialist. So you should be one of I'm hoping to have very specific answers what should be done on the topic, because we know that problems we have.
If it was that easy, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Okay, let's move forward. That's right, Eugen Tokar. He's representing National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, head of the Detective Department of the Organizational and Analytical Support of Strategic Development. And we have Andrejs Lisenko from Latvia, from Latvian Corruption Prevention and Combating Bureau, head of Second Investigation Division. So you have also first investigation division. Okay, great. So maybe before we jump into the discussion as well, you already maybe, Jonathan, a little bit started. So give us, starting from Jonathan, one sentence or two, who you are actually, so that our audience understands also the context. So you are Senior Specialist in Asset Recovery.
Yeah, so I am a UK-trained lawyer. I worked as a barrister in private practice for nearly 20 years. I've been a public prosecutor, and my specialism is in international cooperation and corruption and the proceeds of crime. And the work that we do at the Basel Institute is to support countries in their prosecutions and investigations in relation to corruption, and particularly in trying to recover assets from overseas jurisdictions.
Thank you. So that's right. We will look at you when we will have some specific advices and on our problems. Katerina, you.
My name is Katerina Rozenko, as was already introduced. I work for Transparency International Ukraine. I'm in the anti-corruption field for almost 10 years now, and majorly we work with asset recovery. We worked even before the full-fledged invasion, but now it's more important for us as we need money in the country, and we look for the ways to take them. And asset recovery, besides the Russian assets in the criminal investigations, is still topic that everyone talks about, but not so many results, especially in Ukraine we have. So that's why we hope that this panel will be one of those tools to reach more people and involve them in the topic.
Thank you. Eugen.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Eugen Tokar. I represent National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. We are investigative agency. We investigate high-level corruption in Ukraine, Due to our work, we closely connect with civil society, as presents here by Katerina, with international organizations like Basel Institute, and with our foreign colleagues, like my colleague from Latvia. So we are sure that such events like this are key for our common success, because we need the place to meet with each other to share our experience and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andrei.
Yes, thank you for introduction. So, as it was said, I'm the head of Investigation Division of Corruption Prevention and Combating Bureau of Latvia. So it's something similar to NABU in Ukraine. We are talking more here about the combating. So the Bureau has combating functions, it's investigation corruption, and also the intelligence actions to find out the corruption crimes. So also we are executing the MLAs connected to corruption, MLAs and EEOs received from other organizations, from other law enforcement agencies abroad. So usually we also receive MLAs from NABU, and I think there will be some case to share with you and how we cooperate. And regarding asset recovery and recovery of illicit assets, we are working with the crimes also connected to corruption, but where the money was laundered. So we had banks in Latvia in our past that helped citizens of Ukraine and other countries, mainly post-Soviet countries, to launder the money and to get the illicit funds in other countries.
So yes, this has been also studies that illicit funds in Latvia mainly come from Russia and Ukraine as well. So our law enforcement agencies has actually a lot to do. But coming back then to our topic on asset recovery, then yes, as already has been mentioned, this can be a powerful tool, and of course for Ukraine it's very important to let's make the process as effective as it could be. But Tia, Ukraine has worked and studied the topic recently. So, Catherine, please give the status quo from your point of view, not law enforcement agencies. Where is the problem and what is the existing situation?
Thank you, Nes. We were looking, we'd worked with asset recovery for a long time, but obviously since the full-fledged invasion, some of the priorities were shifted, and we try to come back to the original problems of asset recovery, why we have the panel now and why we think that it's still a problem. I will say some of the main points, and if anyone is interested, we have studies done in more detail, you can check them out. So we have approximately, within the last 4 years, 6,500 verdicts where there is a confiscation decision in the end. And out of this thousands of cases, only 8 requests were sent abroad for recovering the assets that have in the verdict that should be confiscated. Even if taking away all the details and possible things that can influence why such number is low, it's still incredibly low. Out of thousands, only 8 requests during the 4 years. Also, for example, since the independence of Ukraine in early 90s till 2023 included, there were sent 19 requests for confiscation of assets abroad, and 2 were fulfilled. 13 were fails and 4 are still ongoing. So you can imagine that the numbers are just incredibly unsatisfying. And 2 of those requests that were fulfilled, the Ministry of Justice told us directly that 1 of them were fulfilled only because the victim was so persistent. It just took the Ministry of Justice by force and was going and pushing the case forward. So why we think what are the main problems we think that lead to these poor numbers. First of all is obviously the question of the crimes where the assets are being confiscated. So there are so-called conventional crimes and political crimes. So some of the Ukrainian cases that were not successful in confiscation were due to the other jurisdiction, considering that the case was political. For example, it concerns Mikhail Shelkov, who is a Russian oligarch recently, when there was a case in Ukraine about the political issues. There was no possibility that the assets abroad will be confiscated, but when the Ukrainians added the additional accusation about the anti-money laundering, then we have now the possibility to possibly claim in the future the assets abroad. Then there are a lot of cases in absentia. For Ukraine, it's a big deal because since the revolution of dignity in 2014 and Yanukovych and his family fleeing and now the full-fledged war, a lot of people are not there physically in the country. So we introduced the trial in absentia, but there are tricky parts to it when it comes to confiscation from abroad, because not all of the jurisdictions are ready to implement the decisions of confiscations if the trials were in absentia. We have a good case. Unfortunately, it won't be confiscated the assets, but Onyshenko, probably those who read Ukrainian news, is a famous person oligarch, and there were concerns if he was duly notified of the case in Ukraine, if he was sent enough notifications, if he knew the verdict, how will go, etc., in order to ensure the possible confiscation of the assets from Germany. As one of the things, maybe our colleagues will mention what we can, look at to how to notify in order to satisfy other jurisdictions, to meet their expectations. Another big issue is, in Ukraine, we have former USSR practice where confiscation is basically a verdict as a punishment. So there is a final decision of the court, and full confiscation of all the assets, it's a punishment. It's an old practice in Ukraine. A lot of people talking that we need to abolish it, but it's still there. So, and there is special confiscation, what we are talking often as a proceeds of crimes or assets related to the crime and have some sort of trace of the crime. Unfortunately, looking at statistics, for example, out of 150 verdicts of High Anti-Corruption Court, only we have 48, in 4 years, those 150 verdicts, 48 verdicts are as punishment confiscation, full confiscation, and only 22 this special confiscation. So there is definitely, discrepancy in the numbers, and usually prosecution and NABU prefers to go for the full confiscation, which is a problem when it comes to returning the assets. And one more just thing to mention, which is search and tracing of the assets. In Ukraine, is mostly done by Asset Recovery Agency, and it should be rebooted, in our opinion, because, for example, law enforcement agencies within the 4 years sent almost 13,000 requests for searching and tracing assets. It's all over, not only abroad, but also inside Ukraine. And only out of this 13,800-ish requests were sent abroad. So considering the situation, it's still a huge discrepancy between the numbers. And obviously, if you don't search for the assets abroad, then you won't find them. And we think there is a space to be improved that activity. The last thing is joint investigative teams. We think that they proved to be very successful, but unfortunately not widely applied. And they should be, when the law enforcement agencies cooperate between each other, not only it helps asset recovery and confiscation, but also in the cases we saw, it also helps with the evidence base, because often the corruption crimes are trans-border crimes, and the cooperation helps to find the evidence that are not maybe in Ukraine, but or information that is more easy to be obtained in other jurisdictions. So this is just basically to kind of put the foundation of what we observed when we looked into the topic recently and what are our concerns. There is a little longer list, but these are the main ones, and hopefully some of them can be addressed today by other participants of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It sounds very complicated already. But let's try to get answers and some solutions as well. So before we get to NABU and CNAB, our agencies in Latvia and Ukraine, then Jonathan, what do you think? How big the problem is?
Well,
from your international experience.
So, I mean, we can start with a statistic that is somewhat dated now, but it hasn't been looked at again, but I think it's probably still indicative of where we are with asset recovery. In 2016, Europol estimated that there was 110 billion euros generated from organised crime within the EU. And it worked out that from that proceeds of crime, only 2.2% of that amount was being frozen, and around 1.1% was finally being confiscated. And whilst more recent figures have been put for the amount of profits that we get from the proceeds of organised crime, there doesn't seem to be much evidence that there's been a commensurate increase in the amount of assets being recovered, either through freezing, first of all, and then confiscation. So it remains a continued problem. The work that we do at the Basel Institute, we are through our International Centre for Asset Recovery, we support jurisdictions with initially low capacity in terms of investigating corruption, and we support them in the tracing of assets. And in terms of the general challenges that we see in terms of asset recovery, they can really be put down to three broad areas. And of course, every country is different within this spectrum, but certainly capacity itself is one area. There's legal challenges, and then international cooperation. To deal with capacity, first of all, corruption and bribery investigations are complex. By its very nature, bribery is not a public event. So it is not always easy to identify the crime that has taken place. But it's also a fact that where you have offences of bribery and corruption, significant profits are generated, and the people who are conducting the bribery or receipt of the monies, rather, they engage professional enablers, and they use that to hide the assets within the name of companies, in offshore locations, underneath trusts, in all sorts of different corporate structures that make it more difficult to trace where those assets have gone to. And so where countries have got a low capacity in terms of investigating these cases and tracing the assets, that can be a really big issue to start off with, and a real challenge in tackling asset recovery. There are also legal challenges in relation to asset recovery on a domestic level. What are the money laundering laws that are available to the investigators and prosecutors? Are they up to the most recent standards? Which agency has power to investigate? What powers are there to recover assets? We now see in many countries with a more developed proceeds of crime regime, different ways in which assets can be recovered. But it could be that in the countries that we're dealing with, they can only recover either the direct proceeds of crime or funds that were used in order to commit that crime, instead of a more wider asset recovery system, for example, like non-conviction based measures, which would allow for the greater recovery of assets. And finally, in relation to legislation, what we do discover is it's quite often the case that there is just insufficient experience, not just on the part of investigators looking at asset recovery, but also on the part of prosecutors and the judiciary. And to take what Katerina has just said about the example in Ukraine about the ordinary punishment confiscation, if I can put it that way, and special confiscation. If you're faced with the options of confiscation as a punishment, which is a very easy thing to request, you're more likely to go for that order than to go for an assessment of what is actually been, what are the proceeds of this criminal act? How do we calculate that? How do we assess it? And how do we go about enforcing it? And so it's not particularly surprising that there is a tendency to go for the more easy option rather than the more complicated option. But the reality is the more complicated option tends to be what international cooperation is based on. Many of the treaties that we look at are based upon the proceeds of crime. What are the profits that have been generated by a certain criminal activity? And then turning to international cooperation, this remains a significant challenge, not only to obtain evidence for use in proceedings, to actually get your conviction so that you can then proceed to confiscation, but also in relation to the actual sort of freezing of the assets and the ultimate confiscation. And quite frankly, from what we see in the work that we do, the problem is on both sides. Quite often it's on the part of the country requesting assistance because they may not be articulating their requests in a particularly legible way, if I could put it that way, or a way that they can be easily understood. And so if you're receiving that request and you can't understand what the case is about, and you can't understand what you're being requested to do, it's almost human nature that those requests are going to end up at the bottom of the pile. Equally, there are other states who receive requests, and then they come back with a series of further questions, almost wanting you to prove your case, even when you're at the investigative stage. So there is a certain amount on both sides that presents a challenge. And then there's the more practical legal challenges of international cooperation. Dual criminality, whether the offence that you're prosecuting is an offence in the country where you're seeking assistance. Statutes of limitations. Is it still possible to prosecute in the country that you're asking for evidence from? Or where you're trying to enforce a non-conviction based confiscation order, does the other country that you're seeking to enforce that order in, does it have that kind of legislation? Does it have the capacity to give effect to your order? Now, I'm conscious that having been asked about the challenges, I've made it rather gloomy. And I'm hoping that in the course of the discussion as we go on, we can actually see that despite these challenges, there are some very good examples of where countries have built up their capacity, they've been able to improve their legislation and have effective international engagement with other states. But you asked me the question.
Yeah, of course, it was very important for us to understand the whole area. But then, to move to more specific cases, then that's the time to ask our colleague from NABU, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. What's your experience then? And also referring a little bit of those challenges of capacity, of legal challenges or international cooperation. Can you give then, based on your experience and work, what you say? Is it so bad, or do you have some good examples here?
It's complicated.
Yeah, of course.
The short answer is...
It's very complicated, I would like to say, yes. But let's try to understand by your examples and experience.
As we know, asset recovery is an essential component of the fight against corruption, and not only corruption, but organized crime and money laundering. And this, like an undisputed statement, sadly, but it was not clear for the Ukrainian prosecutors and investigators for some long time. We used such approach that, first of all, you should identify the person who committed the crime. Then you should collect the evidence that proves his guilt, and that's the main tasks. But as the crimes became more sophisticated and had strong connections with legal economy, we saw that it's not a successful approach, and we need to change something. Now we understand that we need some complex, some comprehensive tools to counter corruption and its consequences. For example, now we used to have a lot of international cooperation. First of all, we begin from international cooperation at the level police to police, when we use some operative channels to exchange information. For example, now the NABU has more than 25 bilateral agreements with competent authorities of foreign countries. And we don't stop on this achievement. We are trying to make more. And the second, the most traditional way, it's of course international legal cooperation, when we need to use MLA requests to get the evidence from foreign countries, to provide some legal actions on foreign territories, and of course to find and seizure assets. But from our perspective, we can see that only using these traditional tools, it's not about efficiency and success, unfortunately. Because our experience says that to get some evidence, for example, from Great Britain or maybe some other financial centers of the world, you need to wait for several years and even more. But now we have some successful stories when we cooperate in the way of creating joint investigation teams. And this experience shows that it's like uncomparable things. You can, for example, we have a successful story with our Polish colleagues. We investigated together a crime that regarding the ex-minister of Ukraine who was a Polish citizen. And in one day, our Polish colleagues received some evidence, and in this same day, our my colleagues, Ukrainian detectives, could use this evidence in our case to continue investigation. It was like a revolution in investigating corruption crimes with foreign international component.
Can you name also some example with Latvian colleagues?
Yeah, we have another successful story, not exactly. We have
say it as it is.
We have a successful story with our Estonian colleagues. It was about one big state enterprise of Ukraine. There was a huge embezzlement of money from that enterprise, and we created a joint investigation team with Estonian law enforcement, and this was very successful experience because we now the case at the stage of preparing to be bring to the court for hearings.
Sorry, but then can I come back to that Latvian story, which wasn't so successful? Maybe you can, anyway, mention that, because if we don't have like full success, that's also a good sign to identify where are the problems. Because we are here, at least me, and I hope my colleague as well, to understand what we should do in Latvia to actually get off all the problems as much as possible, so that.
The Latvian story is about some problems with our Ukrainian legislation and maybe some traditions of investigation, because, for example, the average NABU case can be investigated for 2, 3, or 4 years. If there is an international component and you need to use MLA requests and other kinds of legal international cooperation, it could take even more than 3 or 4 years. And our courts also, court hearings are very long. Average duration of our court hearings in NABU cases is more about 3 years. And if we count this time together, the total amount of time is often too much for our foreign colleagues that control seized assets. And this case we have with our Latvian colleagues when some assets seizure was lifted, and in other case, Latvian colleagues were more successful than we, and they managed to complete their own proceedings and confiscate the money, Ukrainian money, directly to Latvian budget. We are very glad for them, but our citizens will not understand that it's like a common success, and we should be glad for this result. So I think it's totally the area for improvement.
Mm-hmm.
The Prosecutor General of Ukraine then had to go public and give the interviews and explain that it was not Ukrainian fault, but actually Latvia did not wait Ukraine to deliver the verdict, and only that was the reason why we didn't get the money. Sorry for interrupting.
Latvians were too fast.
Yeah.
Because in Latvia, we also usually complain that our courts are too long and the process is too long, etc. So, but of course, during the recent years, it has we see improvements there. But yeah, that's on the one hand good sign for Latvia, but on the other, yeah, this is an issue we actually then should discuss it with our colleagues and.
Maybe I can add a little bit
Yeah,
about the Latvian practice, because we're talking about this case. So basically, as a colleague from Basel Institute mentioned, we have a simple way and complicated way in Latvia, the same as in many countries. So we can investigate case and get a punishment with the confiscation of assets, or we can go for non-conviction based confiscation. Why it's more complicated? Because we have then 2 cases. We have the main case, criminal case against the person, and we are investigating criminal case, and another case is against the money of this person. And so we need to prove with a civil standard, so not like in the criminal case, above any doubt that the person is guilty in crime, but like in civil, 50% plus 1. That the money is illicit, and then the court decide to confiscate it and transfer to the state budget. So the case the colleague from NABU mentioned, it was this case. We had our own investigation. We found out that we have assets in Latvian bank. We had a frozen order from the FIU of Latvia. Then we received the case. We also seized the money, and then we have, of course, as every country, time we can seize this money, and usually in severe crimes it up to 2 years. So we have 2 years in this case to get all the evidence that is illicit property, money, funds, and etc. In this case, we were lucky to gain this evidence also from the Ukrainian colleagues using the police-to-police cooperation, MLAs, and bilateral agreements, and as a result our court confiscated all the money. But unfortunately we don't have the procedure, we don't have a legislation how to transfer, for example, funds that were confiscated, illicit property, to other countries. So where the main crime was committed. In this case, the crime was committed in Ukraine, but still, like a result, for us, it's very good result, of course, because we have more money in budget. If we look globally, we also understand that it's better that the money is confiscated. Not, for example, we were waiting for 2 years for Ukrainian colleagues, then the seizure is lifted and all the money goes to the China or somewhere where we got no information from. And everyone knows how is cooperation going with some countries. So it was like our success story. But unfortunately, we understand that what is the problem, like for other country, for the prosecutor, for investigator to explain to people that it's also a success because the money from the state budget that were gained, somehow embezzled, comes to other country budget. But in short, because we are time limits, the story is like this. Yeah.
Can I just interrupt?
Yes.
I mean, under UNCAC, I would understand that money that has been embezzled from the state budget of one country, if it's then seized using criminal procedures in another country, isn't that country obligated under the Convention Against Corruption to return those funds to the country from which they were embezzled?
In this case, if I remember correctly, Latvia was used like a transit country for this money to transfer them. Mm-hmm. And that when the Latvian state police got known that there is a criminal case in Ukraine, that there is some reports also from FIU that the money probably were laundered, we started our own proceedings, not only about the crimes that was investigated in Ukraine, but also about the crimes, possible crimes of the bank employees. Because there was a possibility that they helped the person from Ukraine to launder the money. And there is then other crime, different crime. And so at this moment, as I know, the illicit funds were confiscated, but the main case was ended. So it ended with no result, but we confiscated the money. So we went against the money because we were unable to prove the crime, the main crime. So at this point, I think it's not like in every case, and what the convention says to us, when we must return the money. And I understand, so it's maybe in some cases, yeah. And here also, I think there was a problem also where money come from. It wasn't directly from state budget.
Yeah, it was the money of state enterprise, and
yes.
It's not the same.
Yeah, it was quite a scheme was a little bit different used for this crime. It was more complicated, I would say.
I would just, if I may add a couple of words, because maybe not everyone knows Ukrainian context. The case that had place, it was in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So you have also to take into account that back then there was slightly different situation with the speed of investigation and adjudication of such cases. And there was the prosecutor general was often being accused that some of the important and big name cases are being stalled. Mm-hmm. And so let's just say there was not the only case where Ukraine was not able to deliver the verdict of possible confiscation in order to successfully even claim the assets from abroad. Mm-hmm. So just to make sure that this is not the only, now the situation improved significantly. So even if we talk about the low numbers of confiscations, at least we can say that, for example, example, the investigation of NABU and prosecution of special anti-corruption prosecution, they speed up significantly, and even non-conviction civil forfeiture procedure was also introduced quite recently that Latvian colleagues are implemented quite some time ago.
Yeah.
Thank you. Something else? No?
No.
You got your answer?
Yes.
More or less everything clear so far. So as Catherine mentioned, the things are speeding up, and really we are looking forward for good results and cases. But let's then move to the maybe main part even of our discussion, really about best practices. Yes, but solutions. What then could be done? Maybe you have ever some answer or question. What we should do? What Ukrainian side should do? What Latvia or other countries should do actually to solve the problem we discussed in the last 40 minutes or so? Yes, maybe you can get some microphone as well, and then we can get some questions and our comments, and then meanwhile you can think about solutions and next steps to be taken, because we won't go home
on positive way.
We will go on positive way. And next steps, please introduce yourself and your question.
Hello, my name is Skirmantas Bikelis. I'm from Law Institute of Lithuania. And I've got a question about the new modern instruments of confiscations that were introduced recently in the Ukraine, like civil confiscation and also liability for illicit enrichment. And my question is how these instruments were accepted by Ukrainian judges and prosecutors. Is it a kind of success story, or if you could share some comments about it?
Okay, I can start. First of all, it was a very long and hard way to implement these amendments in our legislation. But now we are creating a good practice. We have first decisions about civil confiscation, and it involves also high officials as members of parliament, high officials from law enforcement agencies, and this instrument shows good results, and it has a huge potential in Ukraine, because it's according to our law, and I think this rule works everywhere, that these amendments were implemented in 2019, and we can use it only to these offenses that were committed from 2019 and later. And with next years, we will have a lot of new examples of using this instrument. So I'm sure that it has a strong potential.
If I may add a couple of more negative notes, because we were looking for in TI Ukraine into, and hopefully published soon, on civic forfeiture procedures. Actually, now it is accepted not badly, but it's maybe not as effective as we hoped it to be. We have under, if I'm not mistaken, 9 or 10 cases for all the time the procedure was working. On some of them are still ongoing of civic forfeiture, but it's not only the problem of investigation or that we don't have enough cases to go through this procedure. It's also due to quite low threshold for the money that you can go after you can use the civic forfeiture procedure, because there is a threshold when criminal procedure should apply and when the civic procedure can be applied. And to be honest, it's peanuts in comparison with huge corruption cases, and often it doesn't seem like it worth the effort. And so the practice is still forming in the high anti-corruption court to some of the questions related to that. So we have probably, in my opinion, revisit how the law is drafted when it comes to the threshold of what crimes can be considered as civil forfeiture. And the other point is that we have amazing decision of Constitutional Court quite recently that basically discovered that procedure, both civil forfeiture and illicit enrichment, I'm sorry, unconstitutional. So basically all the existing cases by that moment were closed. They had to be, the law had to be redrafted and they had to be started. So now we're getting somewhere, as my colleague mentioned, but it's still early stages to completely assess.
I can agree with my colleague from civil society, and I can say that now NABU is studying this question about improving the law, and we have a working group on this issue, and I think this year we will propose some amendments to improve this instrument and to make it more efficient.
Thank you for that answer. I think it was very explicit. So some question else? No? Then I will ask, if yes, please raise your hand. No, I don't see. Then let's move to solutions. And as already have been mentioned, maybe I can put in three groups. That one is this, what Ukraine should do actually at home, as you mentioned with this last example with some legislation, and also, let me say, capacity building of and understanding building of investigators, prosecutors, courts, as we have read in this TI Ukraine report. Then international cooperation. Maybe you can then elaborate on that, which is very important because, of course, we understand that's the basics. And also what then, for example, Latvia should do, since we can talk about Latvia or other countries, then what are those, these are, I could say that these are maybe those three areas we can look in, and I would like you to come up with your solutions. I'm sure you have such, at least more or less general or specific, but so that we can then with our colleagues check in next ICC conference what's the progress. Who can start?
Maybe I can start,
you
because
like Great.
We had a situation like in Ukraine, I would say, with non-conviction-based confiscation. So we can share a little bit, because we had it in law for a very long time, but it was not active. And only after 5, 6, 7 years, the investigator understood how to use it. Then they understand that we need amendments to law. Then amendments to law were made. And after the FAT, Moneyval recommendation, OECD recommendation, and all these amendments, everyone began to use this non-conviction-based confiscation. Because before it was only legal document, but it wasn't used. So I would start with these bullet points we received from Basel Institute, yes, from capacity. Capacity, I think, is very important from our perspective and our experience. For example, when we had liquidation of third biggest bank, and hopefully you attended first plenary when we had presentation of former head of Latvian FIU. She discussed a little bit more about this, but we had so much cases. So situation in Latvia was that the state police, economical crime department, and all the state police couldn't handle all the criminal cases, all the FIU STRs and reports about the possible crimes and money laundering. So afterwards, the Corruption Prevention and Combating Bureau also started receiving these FIU reports where the crimes were somehow connected to corruption. So here I would say it depends how is organized cooperation between the agencies in the country. So if you're have no trust between the law and enforcement agencies, prosecutor offices. It's very hard to find the capacity to investigate the big level corruption, I would say, and not only corruption, money laundering and other crimes. I know that we had one big case involved with United States, Ukrainian colleagues, not from NABU, from prosecutor service. It's a boycott our case. I think everyone who is in this field knows this case.
We are also involved.
Yes, but it's the beginning. And what we were facing at this moment, it was how many years ago? I think 8, 9 years ago.
From
So
2015, I think.
2015, yes. So the case was started by prosecutor service with the articles not about the corruption, because then this case would go to the NABU. They didn't want it to do this. They started for some illicit embezzlement, somehow other like forgery and other stuff, money laundering, and we like there is corruption. Say no, you don't understand our law. Ukrainian law says that it's not a corruption. We're like, okay, let's form JIT. We say we cannot form JIT if you have this one embezzlement, but we have corruption. Then okay, then we have parallel investigation. So we had parallel investigation for 5 years, and we were going to the Ukraine. They were coming here. United States representatives were coming. So here I want to highlight that there must be trust between the agencies in the country. Also, understandable which competence and who is investigating what. Like not starting the same investigation in other agencies just to have a results and to show to the parliament, to ministers and so on, and to have a bigger budget.
We have very competitive system.
Yes, I understand. I think all the law enforcement agencies in post-Soviet countries have this system that you must show the results, the numbers. Not the quality, but the numbers. And numbers cannot go lower. They must go every year more and more cases, better results.
This is what we expect from KNAB as well.
This is the system. So we just talked on previous topic in this in the same room about the what is the good result. So how to tell what is good? It's quantity, quality, or some other stuff. But it's the other topic, I would say. So about the capacity, it's up to country to somehow divide to the agencies and find out who is the best for the concrete case. About the international cooperation, I would say MLAs, EOs, it's very good. But if you don't have trust in other organization, for example, we have EOs, we can send the European investigative orders in the Europe. But cooperation with other countries, when you're sending the multi-legal assistance, you will not provide a lot of information to agency you don't trust. You will not send to the MLA to the Belarus right now, or to the Russia. Because you have, maybe you will gain evidence, but you will not send because we understand the situation right now. Also, when you send the MLA to the China and you expect to get something and you're not getting for 5-6 years, so I would say you must build trust, you must know people you're working with. That's why, like colleague mentioned from NABU, we have bilateral cooperations agreement. Not because we like to have a lot of agreements and it looks cool, no. Because we know people, we met on the conferences like this at OECD, at other venues, and we know each other. And when we have a case and we see that Ukrainian citizens involved, we can call them, explain, we can meet, and it's a lot faster than JITs. JITs takes centuries, I would tell. I had JIT. It's pain in the ass, sorry for this, because it takes very long. Because you need to have the signatures of general prosecutor of one country or with another country. Then you have all the paperwork. So for me, it took a year and a half to have a JIT agreement, only JIT agreement. So sometimes in the cases, year and a half, you can have an end of a case for a year and a half in some countries, in some countries. So for me, I would say you must build trust and strengthen international cooperation, especially between the law enforcement agencies which are investigating at the early stage of investigation, of finding out the crime, where is the money, etc. And about the legal challenges, I would say it's not my field, so I leave it up to you.
Yeah, I can agree with my colleague from Latvia, but for example, you mentioned about JITs, that it's very not so good things as I described, but from our perspective, when the both sides are interested in this, it happens very quickly.
Not a year and a half.
Of course, much more, better. I can add something about capacity building that I mentioned before, that our mindset about the importance of financial investigations and asset recovery has significantly changed. And this changing was not on the empty place. It was grounded on a lot of study visits to foreign countries, a lot of trainings from, especially from our international partners, international organizations such as Basel Institute, and we are very grateful for this. Now we have another educational program with Basel Institute for our detectives about the importance of financial investigations, asset recovery, and the new methods of doing these things. So this ability to communicate directly without intermediaries, this importance of knowing exact people in exact country is crucial for effective communication. And I can say that our experience only proves it in every case. Thank you.
I would absolutely echo what both of my two colleagues have said here. You cannot underestimate the importance of international contacts and international connections and having that level of trust between individuals that really does sort of generate good working relationship and does generate results. And I can also sort of point to good examples of where capacity building has improved. And NABU is a classic example. When I first started assisting or doing some work in Ukraine, I saw some mutual legal assistance requests where I simply didn't understand what I was reading. And in part, that was because what had happened was that it was a cut and a paste from a legal document within Ukraine, part of the court procedures. And that had been then translated into English, badly. And the effect of that was that I didn't understand what the case was about. And equally, when we came to the end of the request and looking at what was being asked for, it wasn't clear what the requests were being made for. What did you want the other country to do? Did you want them to go to the bank and get the bank account information? Did you want the police in the UK to make a search of the address? It wasn't clear. But what's absolutely clear now is the requests that are going out that I see from NABU are much clearer in terms of explaining what the case is about, what they're investigating, and understanding what it is that the other country can do in terms of obtaining the evidence. And more importantly, they have contacts now in a number of the different countries, not just at the law enforcement level, but also at the central authority level. And they can send their requests to those countries and say, this is what we're investigating, this is what we're thinking of asking you to help us with. Can you do that for us? And is this request sufficient? And more often than not, the central authority will come back and either say, yes, it's okay, or suggest changes, but it enables that whole procedure to go much faster. And I think you'll find now that a number of requests that go out from NABU are executed a lot more quickly than they were in the past. So it's a really good example of how capacity building, understanding how to draft the requests can really make an impact upon your investigation.
Jonathan, continuing with what should be solutions for the problem, maybe then you can give us some other advice, like more general, for example, international, I don't know, agreements, conventions, how you see the problem, because we hear from NABU and CNAB colleagues, we saw very specific people, human-based solutions, but how you see that situation in the global area?
So what we have now is a number of different ways of communicating on a law enforcement level, but also on a prosecutor's level with people from jurisdictions. So even if you don't have that connection already with the country with which you want to get assistance from, there are ways of obtaining those contacts. And for example, you have groups, you've got the FIU requests, financial intelligence units, and that's a simple way of communicating with an intelligence unit in another country to get a basic financial intelligence about the case that you're trying to investigate. Now, there have been situations in certain countries I've been in where they've come to me and sort of say, can you get the information from the financial investigation unit from another country? And the answer to that is no. And I say to them, why do you want me to do it? Why don't you ask your FIU to do it? And they say, well, we just don't get on with our FIU. So there is a certain amount of, you need to build that trust between your domestic agencies as well. And then, of course, there's other contact points. There's the Camden Interagency Asset Recovery Network. Is it? No, Camden. Karen, anyway. I can never get it right. And then there's the Globe network of the recently launched anti-corruption offices. And then you've got institutions like the International Anti-Corruption Coordination Centre, which is almost a one-stop shop in terms of obtaining intelligence from a number of different jurisdictions, which can really sort of kickstart corruption investigations in different countries. But where there's an international element within your case, the best advice is early engagement with the country with which you are going to request assistance. There is no point in getting to the end of your criminal process, doing a confiscation, and then discovering that the other country will not be able to give effect to your confiscation order because it's not the type of order that they can give effect to. There is no point in seeking a confiscation order in relation to an asset if you haven't already asked the other country to freeze it, because the money may have already gone. And the other reason for early engagement is because those countries may have laws and powers that you don't have in your own jurisdiction, but which they can use in order to assist you in your request for assistance. So it's really, really important that you have early engagement with international partners as soon as possible.
Thank you. Katerina, hearing you wanted to add something. Okay, then Katerina,
Jonathan,
be ready.
I totally agree with you about the early engagement because it's our tradition. Maybe Latvian colleagues have some different experience, but we used to have this approach that let's do everything that we can on domestic level, and then we'll think about international communication. And you are right that early engagement is very important.
About the early engagement, maybe I have good examples and bad examples. It's about building trust. So we had one case, unfortunately, at intelligence level. We had a meeting with, I will not name the countries, with the country's police officers.
It's totally about bad example.
It's bad example. And there was a leak of information. We had intelligence case, and after leak, all the phones which were wired of the persons which were listened were turned off. They haven't used them, and our case, afterwards, we started investigation and so on, because they had a lot of conversation before, but unfortunately it's a bad experience, and also about this trust and everything. So now we also use widely the Eurojust platform. It's very nice.
Yep.
So you have protocols, you have people there who sign sometimes the papers that it's non-disclosure and so on. So also if somebody is wondering how to use it, it's very, very simple, I would say. And I would suggest to use also the Eurojust and all the tools you could, and all the tools you can use to have a good case with the best result you can. So involving of the prosecutor, supervising prosecutor at the beginning is also crucial. For our cases, we had a problem with this one, because sometimes we were investigating, then we're going to the prosecutor office and they're like, no, there is no crime. And you're like, how? There is a crime, but he will go to the court. So when it's non-conviction based confiscation, the same. There is also a prosecutor involved. So you must discuss on domestic level with your supervising prosecutor. And cooperation is everything. On the domestic level, I would say, and international level. And in these cases, criminal cases with international element, it's crucial. Like you said, it's the main thing,
So let's go back to Katerina. What do you think? How it looks?
I will be very brief and not to not repeat what the colleagues already said. But
you agree?
I mean, of course, to the majority of things, I cannot not agree. But I feel like I need to bring up some of the issues maybe that haven't been mentioned before. That first of all, in order to get to the point that everyone discussed here, we need to find the assets that we can possibly confiscate or even investigate to confiscate. I understand that to some degree it's not only the question of present here, for example, agencies, but you're also involved into the process, because in order, according to Ukrainian numbers at least, we have a big issue on that stage that we don't have actually assets we can go actively seek confiscation. And then just to expand on the point that Yevgeny mentioned, that we have an issue of approaches. And yes, we're changing, but NABU is this shiny good example. The question is a little bit bigger and not only NABU related. And approach is the prosecutors and investigators, they don't look into the end goal, as my colleague mentioned, of confiscation. So they we need to look for proper right tools to bring the justice to the perpetrator, keeping in mind that possibly we need to confiscate the assets, because now that is not happening very often. And I also have to say that we need to work on legislation on Ukrainian side, because obviously with European integration and with European practices, some of the things like this confiscation as a punishment just won't cut it anymore. Plus, just as funny example, there were cases when we researched the topic where there was this full confiscation as a verdict, and then the proper authorities came to the person, and the person is just poor. They don't have any money, or they have barely to survive. So what you're supposed to confiscate to starve, for example, a family of 4? How, is it the goal of the possible confiscation? There's a discussion to be had. And then there is a question of human rights. and a lot of other things. And the last thing that I want to mention is I am a civil society expert society, so I cannot not mention that this topic obviously is not very public and transparent due to the obvious reason of criminal investigations. But from what we saw in Ukraine and try to start seeing with, for example, TI Latvia, and hopefully we'll continue this research, there is not much information available on the good practices, on the data statistics, on the court decisions. It's very much closed up when there is this high demand from at least Ukrainian society to understand how it's all going on. And we're kind of in Ukraine grateful that we have this great relationship with, for example, NABU and some other agencies, Ministry of Justice, etc., that we can get some information, but I know for sure that in a lot of countries that is not the case, and even with all our great connections, we still have to compile some of the data by hand and calculating and looking at the court statistics, etc., etc. So the transparency and a little bit more of available information where it's possible, that also something that could be good and that we can use also for the benefits of the investigation when it's done, to publicize the successes, for example, of such investigations.
Thank you. Dear colleagues in the audience, do you have any questions? Or do you have maybe some suggestions what else should be done? Or critical questions? Yes, here we see. Here you go, the microphone.
Hello, I'm Tom Chrisley. I work with the New South Wales ICAC in Australia, Independent Commission Against Corruption. Question just relates to asset recovery and confiscations and unexplained wealth. Is it always on you as a prosecution? I understand there's different burdens of proof regarding civil and criminal, but is it ever on the suspect or the accused to have the burden of proof on him to explain how we obtain those assets as opposed to being reversed on us?
If we talk about confiscation or special confiscation according to criminal case, this is a task of prosecutor to prove that these assets has some criminal origin, criminal connections. If you talk about special confiscation, and as my colleague from Transparency International mentioned, the confiscation as a punishment can be used to hold property without any regards to crime. But it's like outdated provision, and we should improve it and make it at the same standards with international law. But if you talk about civil confiscation, there is another standard of provement of this to win the case for the prosecutor. So each side of the case should prove its position. So if prosecutor would be more convenient, he will win. If not, he will lose.
Maybe I can add for our practice. So in our non-conviction-based confiscation, it regulated in criminal law and criminal procedure law, but like you said, there is a reverse burden of proof. Yeah. So the person who owned the property, the funds, should tell the court, the investigator, where is this money from? And so idea behind this is that if person have such funds, money, property, it's easy to him to show where from. So, but still, where is the problem? It worked very well for us for, I think, 5 years now. We have now waiting for decision of Constitutional Court because of human rights. So what's the main point? That they don't have this constitutional right for the court hearings and all this stuff because the burden proof is reversed. And we, give too big attention to the person to prove it. So now the Constitutional Court went to the European Court of Justice, and we are waiting for preliminary ruling. So everything could change like it was in Ukraine. So we are waiting, because for us it's a huge amounts of money for Latvia. In 2021, the seized amount was 1.5 billion. So it's huge, and we confiscate every year. I think 2023, the last statistics, it was 500 million confiscated in state budget. It's huge for Latvia, with the state budget, I think 13 billions or more, something around this. So 13. You understand, and if it will go through the rulings and they decide it's unconstitutional, we will have a lot of problem, and we will start from the beginning. Yeah.
Someone else, some question, suggestion? No? Then maybe we can, there is, yes? Okay, go on.
A short response to the statement that when you have some property, it's easy for you to explain it. Yeah, I guess it's more about the European business culture and European things, Western European, because there were some investigations of suspicious money in Lithuania, which came from Ukraine, actually. And when the Lithuanian officers asked some assistance from the Ukrainian colleagues about the possible sources of this money, the answer was that there are no databases which could explain the situation like 3 years ago or earlier. And also, I guess the business standards are a little bit different in some countries, especially more to the east, more to the south. And in these situations, if we expect that a person should be able to explain the origin of the money, which would be rather easy in Western European business culture. So it's not so easy sometimes in other environments, and we may suspect that this money may be from corruption, may be from illicit cigarettes, from drugs. But also we cannot rule that maybe this just simply from some businesses, not where accounting fails, but still it's not such a criminal money. So it's a bit complicated with this shift of burden of proof.
Yeah, but maybe I can add a little bit. So we are not going with the case like we found money, let's go confiscate it. No, in banks, putting the funds into account, you have all these forms, know your client. They're providing information where is money from. So the standards in European banks are pretty high to show where is money from. They're providing documents. So we are analyzing everything. And only then we still go to the court, and the judge analyzes all the evidence and then decide, is it enough evidence to prove that most probably the funds and illicit funds are from the crime. So the person have all the possibilities to show that it's not like this. He can find these contracts or shows that he had granny in Russia maybe or somewhere, and it's only from testament and so on. So I don't think that this system isn't working well and not giving a person rights for defend in the court and provide evidence. I think it works pretty well, and if we will have not enough evidence, the judge will not take such a responsibility to confiscate all the funds.
Okay, thank you. A very short comment that that particular case was about the cash. A person had 1 million euros, even more than €1 million, which he said he brought from Ukraine, and he had some explanation, and that's a difficulty for us, for our investigators, to disprove that information because there were no documents, and that was a criminal investigation, so they could not go on with the criminal investigation. unless you go maybe with the civil proceedings, maybe then.
Yeah.
But still, a risk of unjust decision is still exists when have no documents.
It exists even in criminal cases. So in these cases, I would say yes, there always a risk.
Can I just two words that, in the case of Ukraine, even if there is such thing available, first of all, if it's something like, if the person ever had some sort of a position in the state-related affiliated agencies, there are ways to get approval of funds. And then there are if there is if there is cooperation between Lithuanian, for example, side and Ukrainian, and on every side, as mentioned today already, the willing to cooperate, there are asset declarations or tax declarations and a lot of other things that this money, especially in such quantity, should have been somehow seen. If it's not seen, then there is a question of, if they are legal or not. Plus, there are already cases of UK of non-conviction-based forfeiture cases where there were state officials involved. And if you don't receive official salary, then enough to cover, then you can get. So it's not only European practice, it's also United Kingdom practice and United States practice, but it's always human rights concerns. But the question is, where should be the line and to what degree you should kind of entertain this balance. With Russian assets, we have a different, completely horrible situation, and we won't talk it about today, but the human rights, also the question, and who should prove where.
Okay, thank you. One last question before I move to the very last question, but the one question to Katerina specifically. We haven't discussed the question about returned assets to, for example, Ukraine, but in the case, if really everything goes good and Ukraine is the case of success story in asset recovery, then how do you see with what rules actually the money could be returned, meaning that I have heard in morning discussions that, for example, with a specific rule to give the money, for example, to civil society organizations, at least part of that, for building up democracy, transparency, anti-corruption activities, etc. How you see the answer?
Again, not simple, because we don't have many in the world successful examples of return and then management of these assets. I think that first of all, we should not think of new mechanisms to be built. We should think on how we can build up the existing agencies' capacities so they can do their job. And in Ukraine, as in the majority of countries, we have the agencies that control, for example, state budget and their expenditure, if this money returned to state budget, like financial control agencies. We have asset recovery and management agency, where the money can also come from the abroad, and they should decide to sell them or to manage them, and what to do with them. This agency also should be build their capacity and maybe revisit their current work. But of course, there are ideas of creating funds that will decide where this money came from abroad should go, and I think this should be the decision if everything else fails. And country is obviously do not have democratic government, do not have the capacity, do not have resources to decide where their own money should be put into. Because if you have conditions on basically money stolen from your country, how your country should use them, then there are bigger questions than who to give this civil society or expert society this money to. But I think it's one of those challenges for asset recovery that we all know is there, we all discuss for ages, but until we have a certain case, we won't be able to say in practice how better way to implement it. Though I will always say first should we look at the national system existing before we go anywhere else.
Good. Let's stop it here. This is new discussion later on. You have 1 minute for each to summarize in one sentence to summarize your summary of this discussion and findings. And I usually want to have this call to action, like first next step when you will go home, like on your KNAB, NABU, or Basel Institute or TIA Ukraine, what you could do on this topic to really coming back to the title of the discussion, effective asset recovery, and so that Ukraine can be this success story in this. Maybe let's start from more specific to more wider answers. Andrei from KNAB.
Yeah, like summarizing everything from my side, I would say the main thing is cooperation, building connections with other institutions, and using existing system, trying to use the legal system and what you have now in law, and amend it, because the amendments and everything else goes for very long time. So you need to use tools you have, and not to forget to use other agencies that can help you on domestic and international level. And even if in the beginning of the case you think and it looks very bad, maybe in the result it will be a good case. So not to be afraid to start these cases and investigate cases. Even it is very complicated and ask for a lot of resources, you must try. I would say so shortly.
One thing, what you will do.
What I will do.
Yeah, exactly. That's the main question.
Yeah.
What you can do and you will do. What you can promise to help.
To help Ukraine.
Yeah, but you at KNAB, back at home, what you can do?
I think we had and have a great cooperation with NABU. So NABU detectives.
So you will send a thanks letter to colleagues in NABU.
We definitely will exchange our visit cards and we'll continue our communication.
Building this trust.
Building the trust between us.
Okay, agreed. Thank you. Yuan from NABU, from Ukraine. What's your, in one sentence, what's your summary and next step?
I began my speech about the importance of international cooperation and to know each other in person. And I'm very glad to hear the response from my colleague from Latvia that we are on the same wave. Yeah. I have become more convinced in this statement, and some concrete steps that I could mention now will be about we will look for the experience of Latvian experience in civil confiscation. It's very interesting for us because, as I mentioned before, we are working on improving our legislation, and we need some useful examples for this. And I think we will establish a closer connection with our Latvian friends.
Thank you. Nice to hear. Katerina.
Nationally, I think we will continue working on legislation improvement. We already do in a lot of things that was mentioned today. STI Ukraine, we will do that, continue to do that. Internationally, I think that what we started with STI Latvia, and hopefully more countries and more chapters of transparency can join this initiative, to look from our expert side on how the asset recovery and how it works, and how different jurisdictions cooperate with Ukraine, between each other. I think that should be our next step.
Yes.
I think on behalf of the Basel Institute, what I would say is we will continue to support our partner countries. What are we going to do tomorrow and the day after? Well, we're going to continue to look for innovative ways in which countries can cooperate together, different ways in which assets can be recovered. We're going to start looking a bit more at those who are enabling this corruption, those who are enabling assets to be hidden. How can we start to take action against those people with our international partners to actually discourage that kind of activity in order to reduce the amount of stolen assets that can be hidden overseas.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this discussion. I will take one word, trust and personal relations with me as an answer to such a global problem. But maybe this is something we can start. Thank you for your patience and being here with us for around an hour and a half. So let's look at our schedules, and I hope everyone has some after parties scheduled. So let's meet there, and of course tomorrow and after tomorrow as well. Thank you, everyone.